Sometimes you wonder whether how bad of a you ever try to think about how you are as a human being objectively. Like when you remove the subjectivity out, when you remove the pain, emotions, and attachment out, which is completely possible, right? Like you can just reflect on yourself like a third person, right? Like just look at yourself like a third person, and more often than not, that's where I tend to find inconsistencies or flaws, things I said, things I wish I didn't say. Um, it's my best way to also realize whether I'm aware in the moment or not, like just like looking at myself as like a third person, right? Like it's a practice I was fairly yeah, it's something I started recently, and it was like it can also be scary sometimes, right? Because it screws with your head whether and when you can look at things objectively, when you should be doing things subjectively, whether to believe what's right or wrong, right? Like that's where the problem, like that's where the interesting part is. Like truth is one of the most subjective things to exist. There are some universal truths, like for example that the fact that everything passes, that everything is transient. Um, all feelings, all sensations are ephemeral, right? Like they rise only to pass. Uh, Again, like the same on the same thread line, you have the fact that everything changes, whether you like it or not, for good or for bad, whether it's good or bad. These are universal laws, um, or universal truths rather. But then there's some subjective truths, right? Like, and everybody has a different truth to the same story. It's what helps us sleep at night. It's what makes sense to us. It's each of your truths is what you believe in to have a clear conscience, right? To be away from the guilt and the burden of things. Um, Not to be away, but to deal with it, right? Like it's essentially what people tend to call closure in relationships, right? Like it's nothing but essentially the truth. And again, truth is very subjective. Um, the question eventually, the hard part is sometimes you arrive to a subjective truth which sets you free to an extent, but if that truth is something the world doesn't agree to, are you delusional, or are you incredibly secure because that truth should also make sense to you and you alone and nobody else, right? Like nobody else can have the context of your consciousness, of your decisions, of your thoughts. um, so if it just makes sense to you and you alone, can you be completely free from uh, the opinion imposed from the world? The answer is yes. uh, the deviation arises when you are second guessing whether what you think is actually the truth or not, right? Like um, there's usually like a ping pong that goes through when you're trying to arrive to a conclusion or closure in any situation, right? Like in my case, it's usually um, the side of I'm the problem, or everything I did was bad, or I'm the person who's wrong. Uh, that's the side that aggressively is in picture. Um, what it tends to usually also do is it illusions me into probably a believing that I'm worse than I am. Um, yeah, it kind of breaks you entirely down in terms of like you can struggle to believe in yourself, and you can just believe in everybody else's opinion because you only always take the blame on yourself. Um, Always taking the blame on myself is like a real a real reflex in situations of pain and defense where I'm just like, hey, I'm the fault. Um, because I always just tend to think that I'm the problem. Like ever since growing up, like I've always felt that I'm the reason why anything is insufficient, inadequate, or something externally didn't work out, right? Because I'm just always. It stems from like this idea of like trying to be a better human and improving because you're always like, hey, I could have done this better, I could have done that better, and you wait in so much that you think that hey, I didn't do these two things, and that's exactly why this happened. So I'm the bad person because I didn't do these things, right? This is where the reflection and looking at yourself from a third party POV tends to like be tricky, right? Like because that's what helps you see these two things that you could have done. Uh, but subjectivity can like take the better or the best subjective truth, and whether it's the real truth or not. And like through the years, um, it has been one of the most eventful years of my life, where I think um, I went into a certain space, a mindset, weakness, vulnerability, inaction, sloth, um, poison, infection, a bunch of these things, right? Like which maybe like which my friends tend to tell me that you're being too harsh on yourself, but I realize that um, everything that goes in me comes out. And if you're seeing a consistent problem with your work, with your family, with your partner, with your friends, with your colleagues, you have to you realize that you're the problem, right? Like it's the lens you view the world with. If your lens is blurry, if your lens like it's blurry, is essentially like lack of clarity of thought or lack of conviction, then you're going to struggle with conviction across all layers. If it's uh, the lens that the world's bad, then you're going to see the bad in people more than the good in people. Uh, and this lens is usually like this lens can be an adult onset thing, right? Like clarity of thought could be something that you're just struggling with, like say this year, but like always had in life, or it could be a byproduct of childhood conditioning. What I mean by that is that I grew up believing and like being told that the world's a cruel place, money is everything, um, and that in turn uh, didn't. So I never really learned that people are everything, right? Like I was never told, and I didn't have a healthy enough consciousness awareness to figure it out on my own either. To believe that okay, people, relationships, and the people you really care about and being there for them trumps money, joy, ambition, um, social status, selfishness, and almost like a lot of it, right? Like it's something that I'm learning now, that being there for your people is the currency, is the only thing that really matters, or like people are the currency, right? Like people run the world. Um, Everything else is like sort of materialistic and secondary. If you can be like kind, compassionate, and nice to people and not hurt them, and that's great. Um, but even though I thought I was like a nice person, um, I'd end up like hurting a lot of people around me by doing things, just by it's hard to even explain or like draw the character sketch for you as to how I would hurt people, or I have been, or I do still hurt people. Uh, and sometimes like I can't figure out if it's my misery or theirs. I can't figure out if there is consistently or something that I need to be doing, or it's their misery too, right? Like it's how they deal with things, because perception is also like, again, this is where again subjective truths come into play. My subjective truth can't be yours. um, how you perceive my truth or me is something I have no control over. um, so while perception's a bitch, it sometimes often also takes a toll on you, because people, right? Like although like you are an individual entity, and there are other individual entities you care about, and you do not know anything about their consciousness, their thoughts, their feelings, and they don't know anything about yours, it's still people that you're supposed to care for. So do you value their opinion? Do you value their perception to a high degree? Or do you eventually just throw your hands up in the air and say, hey, it's your misery and not mine? I think I did my best. Now I could like, it's an example I tend to give to most of my friends all the time, is that, you could get one good compliment and then you'd be happy for a year. Um, if you could be getting 100 great compliments a day and you would be unhappy and a sad, depressed fuck. You could be getting one bad compliment and you'd be sad for, and you'd hold a grudge, not a compliment, like one bad comment or one bad thing done to you, and you could hold that grudge for the next 20 years, or 100 different things could happen to you every day and you'd still hold no grudges. So essentially, like it's entirely 100% up to us on what we hold and what we don't. And this is where I say that this is again a universal truth, and figuring if I should weigh this in entirely when other people are perceiving me or my actions, where I'm just like, hey, there are these four situations, you could take it in any way whatsoever. I have no control, so I shouldn't worry about it. Um, but it becomes hard when there's attachment, right? Uh, because then you cannot see it so objectively as these four pillars that, hey, you do anything, how I can't do much. but you still want to do more. You still want to do something about it because you care about them, right? Like these are people who hold value in your life, or have held value in your life. Um, and disappointing people you love is like an exchange. Is like if there was an Olympic competition for it, like I think I'd represent India, or I'd probably like take home the W. I'm kidding. I think see these are the times when like the weight of the past gets to me, where I'm just like, wow, like so many bad things I've done, like so many people are disappointed, so many people hate me, etc., etc., etc. But then these are the times when I also remember that I have these like five motherfuckers who would give their life for me, or I'd give my life for them. Like these five people who, three, five, one, whatever. Like the number keeps changing. I don't really care much. But like these are people who, with whom like it's far more than friendship, right? Like you may not necessarily it may not be necessary for you to know them for years or decades, but these are the people for whom you have like the piece of that place in your heart where you're just like, I'll do anything, right? So it's important to also remind and remember that there are some people who like you in these situations. That's my salient board. um, but then I question whether, it's just because I haven't disappointed them yet, but when does that happen? Maybe it could be tomorrow, day after, who knows? So there's things like these that you can like probably sometimes struggle with. But anyway, uh, well, perception is everything. How you perceive yourself is, I think, the world will start perceiving you. Like if you perceive yourself as a winner, as somebody who respects himself, like I've seen directly, the world like sort of start seeing that in you. Um, and when you don't, when it's all negative self-talk, when you think you won't amount to much, when you think you're an absolute failure, when you think um, you're a really really bad person, your actions will actually be the one of a bad loser, etc., etc., etc. That's like, it's really what you tell yourself. Like I think, I say this often, that your relationship with yourself is equally and 100% directionally like 100% directly proportionate to your relationship with God. God is in all of us. Like he's, like this might get too much. Like when I say God, I do not necessarily mean like a religious deity, or like somebody to worship, somebody like some external entity, but like the place of worship and devotion is first here. Serving yourself, like how people tend to say serve God. I think serving yourself, not in a selfish way, just doing what you exactly want to do, and doing it in the nice way possible, um, is a way to find God in yourself. Um, the more you, the people pleasers are not close to God because they serve others over themselves. Smooth talkers aren't close to God. Um, or like essentially anybody who like compromises themselves and puts anybody above, like even a single person. Your prime time example is likely your parents or your mother, right? Like they're unfortunately conditioned to put their kids above everybody else, right? Like which in the long run, like I think I see it as like a very religious act that they've done, to devote their lives to their kids. But over the long run, it's incredibly harmful because it destroys their agency. It destroys their relationship with God in their own selves. Like they can never serve themselves because they've like kept people above them. And I think for a great time in life, like I think I never really put myself above anybody else. Um, like I'd really put like strangers, or people I care about, or their opinions or their feelings over mine, right? Like I would struggle to like hold ground, and I think it's something I'm still working on like very actively, and it's really hard, on days, and on days it's like the easiest thing to do. But serving yourself is sort of a way to just be there for yourself. And like I realize like your ambition, your dreams, everything is a promise to your future self, and if you don't show up for him today, your future will suffer, right? So uh, everything I do, right, like if I'm working out, even when I'm happy, sad, tired, even if I'm when I'm grinding like really hard, when I'm sad, happy, tired, it's a way to show up for myself. It's a way to show up for the future Heath, who needs to look back and be proud, because uh, evidence is the only way to build confidence. um, Action builds confidence, evidence builds confidence. If you don't have evidence to show for things, you're really in an illusion. And I think I'm still like in the biggest illusion of life. um, I, I think I have been trying to figure out some ways around it. Like there are I think feel that I've had times where I could see through the illusion of self, but like either it's a constant state, or it's not, right? So if it's not a constant state, then maybe I don't know yet. Like ego in me is like, my ego is like ginormous, and the reason why, and I think I suppressed it for way too long in life. Like I didn't serve my ego for way too long, and so eventually, like somehow, I was trying to suppress it, and it only grew stronger. It only became so much more bigger, wider. And ego is like not necessarily a great thing. It's your relationship with your ego could be really really bad. Like it could cause harm to you and others to have like an unhealthy relationship with your ego. Uh, it's like sort of like part of it is accepting it. Like everybody grows up thinking or being told that you should not have ego. Does anybody really tell you what is ego? How does it work? Like I think effectively every person has ego. You can go through like a dissolution of ego, you can go through a better relationship with your ego, yes, but net um, nobody really told what ego is in the first place, right? Like my understanding so far in the past 3 months has been built in a way where ego is an illusion. Ego is the idea of an individual self. So we at the same point in time we're two things. We are humans, and then we are individual entities. Individual entities are essentially like I have a name, place, I belong somewhere. This is my religion. This is whom I worship. This is where I'm from. This is my age. This is your local or individual entity. And then there's humans, where there's no separation, right? Like we are a part of all of humanity. Like me and you, we're all the same. Me and you serve sort of the same purpose to the planet. We're humans, right? Like we're all the same. There is so when you start seeing when you start stop separating yourself from the world, is when you can feel that everybody is you. There is no division based on religion, caste, language, nationality, color, profession, caste. Could be 100 things. Like all are people. We're all people. We're all humans. Um, that's the part where I found maximum compassion, kindness, and joy for the world, is when I've started believing that I'm a human, and so is everybody. And ego is this individual entity which makes you believe you're different. Now it's completely fair for you to believe you're different, because you cannot access somebody else's consciousness. You're the only person. Um, you think you're the only brain that exists, right? In some shape or form, we just give like far too much importance to our consciousness and that voice in our head, and that's the ego. Uh, and if you have an unhealthy relationship with your ego, you're fucked. If you have a healthy relationship, you can, like, you are fucked, your friends are fucked, like your relationships, you'll struggle with people dramatically. Case in point. And again, like ego isn't something that's arrogant or causes or makes you do evil things. Suppressing it makes you do evil things. So I think it's more about like integration of self and with your ego, which, like, integrating, like accepting that that's just a part of you, right? Like we all have like a demon and a god inside us. Accepting both is important, right? Like if I think there's a god, usually like polarity is also an illusion. Like to think good and bad, to think demon and god, to think profit or loss, to think defamation or appreciation. Like polarity is a characteristic of reality, right? Like it's of illusion. In reality, like, yeah, in life there's only just one thing. You just move, right? Like to categorize it as good or bad, or highs or lows, is you giving it names for the sake of conveniences. But in reality, like if you were to just look at 8 billion people, it's just life going at the straight line, right? Like, is there any good or bad? Is there any highs or lows? It's just like one transient flow of water. I think water is like one of the best examples I could give you, right? Like, because it just flows, it keeps on flowing. It can get stale in the middle. It could run into a dam. It could run into an ocean, a pond, a river, a commode, a tap, or like a pristine well in like a historical or religious place, but it's water, right? It goes through like a billion different things, but it's water. That's sort of like how life tends to be, right? Like, do you want to identify and pick and choose what's dirty, what's healthy, what's exact, why stale water, fresh water, ocean or not? You are water, my friend. You just have to keep on going. That's the thumb rule. Um, so yeah, polarity is like usually an illusion that we create for ourselves, like to think that there's two things or three things or five things, but it's all one. It's all one of one in some sense, right? Like it's all a unique experience. No two experiences can ever be the same. No two kisses can ever be the same. There is a difference, right? Like because they exist at different points in time. Anything that's in the past is something you can't access. Everything in the future is again something you can't access. All you're left with is this specific reality. The next time I record myself, it's not going to be the same. Even if I hit like stop and start again, it's not going to be the same. So reality is like so transient, like it's like water. Um, and when you start realizing this is when you can like probably have equanimity across these polarities of life, highs or lows, good or bad, profit or loss, breakups or falling in love, all of that. Um, when you can have equanimity is when you really understand the idea of life, right? Like when you just realize that things go on. Uh, it never really stops. Um, and to be happy across happiness, like to be happy across good things and bad things, you have to just be in the moment, enjoy it, and not get attached to it in a way where you want it. Like cravings and aversions are like two forms of strongest attachments, right? Like I think I'll go much longer into it in some other video, some other time. Cravings and attachments are our single point of unhappiness. And cravings and attachments also are also like a byproduct of memory and experiences, which is nothing but baggage, right? Like in some sense, like being attached to a memory or an experience is the way we get trauma, is the way we get unhappiness, is the way we crave like that special sabji your mom makes, or we run away from, like water, height, confrontation, commitment, could be anything that you're running away from, but it's because of memory and trauma or your past experiences, so to speak, where they come into the way for you to be making like a good enough decision. Anyway, while we're water, um, and maintaining equanimity and like humanizing, like feeling that like not separating yourself from anyone, like it's a practice that I've started doing off late, is I do not look at anybody and say I will never be that. There is no difference between them and me. All humans are capable of experiencing the exact same thoughts and feelings. All humans, there is absolutely no difference between any of us, right? Like in terms of experiencing it, abstraction comes in a way where are you feeling it? Like I may feel joy just by a walk, you may feel joy when you're in a private plane, whatever, but like it's joy regardless, right? Like so all human beings, irrespective of their strata, society, etc., do experience fear, pain, pleasure, happiness, joy, compassion. When you stop separating yourself from anybody, right? Like that, oh ye to aisa hai, he's like this, I don't want to be like this, and the shebang is where I've seen in my life that happened to me, right? Like is when life like really teaches me a lesson and reminds me that hey, you've become everything you didn't want to be. I think it started with my father first, where I was like, oh, I don't want to be like everything that he's been, and then I saw it happen in my real life, no matter how hard I tried. In some sense, they're great, right? Like in some, and this is also like why two things shouldn't happen. You should not have any heroes, or worship a hero, and at the same point in time, you should never separate yourself from anybody else. Like these are again two polarities, right? Like a role model that you really look up to, you're like, hey, I wish I had their life, etc. And at the same point in time, you look at a beggar or you look at a criminal and you're like, hey, I'd never want to be this. Like I think the great part is to not believe in either. Like that's where I've arrived. Like I have no heroes, and I have nobody whom I despise in a way where I say that, oh, I don't want to be him, because I've realized I am him. I'm capable of doing all the things he is, and you never really know what the future has for you. You just have to be like a tad bit realistic, and like be a nice person generally. But that has its cons. Like each time I've not served myself, which was for a great time in life, I couldn't make anybody close to me happy in a great way. Um, I really couldn't, because you come first for everything. Um, in a way where if you're not doing what you want to do or need to do, and if you're compromising on yourself, you won't be able to do justice to that person, that opportunity, that situation, that point in time. So like doing what you want is agency, and doing what you want is single-handedly the most important thing to your happiness and also the people around you. You could be called for like a nice family gathering and you really care about your parents, but if something else is important and you compromise on it, you're going to be in two different miseries. A, through the event, through the lunch, etc., you're just going to be thinking about, oh, what have I sacrificed, and because of that, you're not going to be able to be present at that point in time there. So either you make up your mind and you're like, hey, I've made my choice, I'm not going to think about it, and I'm just going to go to that event or that dinner and just be with my family, like be there in the moment with them. Or you say no and you're just like, hey, I really appreciate this, but I think I've got something to do and which I can't compromise on. And they'll always understand. People around you will always, like, if they care about you, they'll always understand. But for far too long, I didn't know these things. Um, I did not know how to say no. That's a nice person syndrome. Again, a video I'll eventually make, like the difference between what is a nice person and what a good person is. TLD, or nice people are insecure people, people pleasers, put up everybody else above themselves, and eventually will not have any real relationships in life. Good people are the people who put themselves above everybody else, are high agency, um, can say no, can break hearts, can do tough things, can hold tough conversations, and eventually, by nature of like doing these things, will have great relationships in life because they know how to balance it, they know how to show up for themselves and keep everything healthy. It's when there's a deviation between your thoughts and your action is when your life gets fucked. Happened to me. Um, it's when you think about something else but you do something else. Uh, think about serving yourself or doing what's right for you. What you end up doing is the exact opposite. You don't serve yourself. And so, as I explained in that example, you're neither serving yourself and you're half-heartedly there. So you're just like, what the fuck, right? Like you're split in a situation where you're like, मुझे भी कुछ नहीं मिला और मैं इनको भी साथ करके आ गया. Anyway, I yeah, I think there'll be a nice person, good person. There'll be a craving aversion piece. Eventually, like I think if I learn and understand enough of things, I would definitely want to like talk a lot about like how to observe your thoughts and and how to build a better relationship or understand your thoughts. But for now, ciao. I'll see you all soon.